And welcome, everybody, to yet another bizarre exploration using the tools of consciousness. And today we are talking about reactions and resistance and what the hell else is possible. And in this conversation, I want to share with you a really massive, I would say, like super fundamental shift I've received in my life. I wouldn't say it's overnight, but I have actually been able to overcome my reaction and my resistance around my parents. Say what? I used to be like a walking, talking resistance. Like anything my parents would say, I'd react like almost on an autopilot. That's been one of my, tough relationships in life that, I used to say I have a love-hate relationship with my family. And so, and I never really liked the way I showed up. So it was more than anything else. It was like, I didn't like the person I'd become around my parents and around my family. And that had to change. And for a really long time, I'd been asking for it. For a really long time, I was asking for it while resisting it. And, how sometimes we ask for things, but we're not truly asking. Like, we're not in a space to really receive what we're asking for. So I kind of like dilly dallied with that for years and years and years and years. And today, I wanted to share with you guys what is truly possible and available. Like if me, like a walking, talking reaction and resistance around my parents can transform it, like truly what the fuck else is possible in the world? That's like what I'm wondering with this exploration with you today. And what communion is available as a way of being and creating, because a lot of times on this channel, in my life, through my work, I talk about creation, confidence, and a different way of being in the world, and your businesses or anything, the way you're creating your living, basically whatever that is for you, and having like a different, I want to say, experience, for a lack of a better word, with that. Like, what's your reality with life, with living, with creation? What is that which makes your life worth living? What is that you've always wanted to be, that you've always known as possible? What are all those ways in which you judge yourselves? Because while, first things first, judgment is the greatest unkindness that we perpetrate on ourselves, judgment can also sort of be a gift in disguise, all the ways in which we make ourselves wrong, because it can, if you allow it, give you a lot of information on what else is possible. What are you aware of? Like whatever it is that you're judging yourself for. So, for example, with my parents, whenever I used to be around them, and I would show up as a reaction, walking, talking, like literally they would open their mouth and I'd be like, what? Like I'd be standing in front of them with my barriers raised up, ready to fight, ready to defend myself. Like that was the energy with which I showed up. And I then judged myself for it, obviously, because that's what we do when we're humanoids, right? We judge ourselves all the damn time. Uh, but underneath that judgment was also an awareness that this is not how I'd like to show up in my life. So deep underneath that was the contribution of receiving what I know is possible. And it has been a really long journey for me, like 30, almost 35-year long journey for me. But okay, first things first, let's start here. So, um, I met my parents after 3 long years uh, last month. Yeah, it was last month in April. They came here. No, they were supposed to come visit me here in Seattle in 2020, March. Their tickets were booked. And literally a week before they were supposed to be here, they were already packed. The world shut down, right? And we hadn't met for another year before that, and then 2 years that followed. So for 3 years, we hadn't really physically met. And no matter how much, like the reason I said like the love-hate relationship with my parents and my family is because, much as I resisted and, whatever had always had reactions around them, I also had a deep caring for them. And I know that somewhere underneath, in whatever their way, whatever way in which they have understood life and created their life, that there is a caring from that side too. I'd always known that. And I've always been, what else is possible? I don't think I was probably asking it in those words, but somewhere underneath all that was a demand in my universe that something else is available, like a different way of being should be available. And it has nothing to do with my relationship. It has nothing to do with what my parents are, how they show up, what they do, how I like. It has nothing to do with any of that. It had everything to do with what a different way of being that I had always known is possible, should be available. So, my first question to you before I even go further in this conversation is, what do you know is possible? What different way of being do you know has to be available? What are the ways in which you show up in your life that you don't necessarily like a lot? And what else is possible? What's right about that? If you didn't have to judge yourself for the way you show up, the ways in which you do not desire to truly show up, but sometimes do, because, oh well, we don't have to live it perfect. We just have to live it engaged. And so, what else is truly possible? And so, anyway, last 2 years have been so transformative for me. Like, I really, really, really dug into the tools of access consciousness, a lot of what I talk about here, of which I'm a certified facilitator. How did I get so lucky that I get to do this as work? Like, really empowering people to know that they know, empowering people to know that there is something right about you. There is nothing wrong with you. So anyway, it's a modality, a way of life and living that I receive from enormously every single day. And especially in the last 2 years when I made the choice to like consciously study, like literally um, study this shit, like, and see what is truly available. And there is this backstory to that too, but that's for another time. But essentially, like, I've just been, whatever, as it happens. So with consciousness, when you're playing with the tools of consciousness, and a little bit of a side tangent for a moment here, I promise I'll come back on track. And I also promise this is related to the track we're walking. So when you're using the tools of consciousness, the thing about that is we tend to think that, change shows up like in a very spectacular way, that, oh my gosh, like the clouds would part and there's going to be like the light shining down on you and you have arrived and you have received you. Like, I don't know about you, but that's sort of like how I used to look at things, that, oh my gosh, I need to change, and like make myself wrong for that on the journey too. But in truth, consciousness works in a very subtle way. It's like a choice you make, like any choice that you make, creates a future. And the more you start making these nano choices, I'm literally going to say that, like nano choice can be something as simple as, I don't feel like waking up right now, but I will. Because I know that lying down on the bed is not the energy I like my life to be. So those tiny little choices that you make overall compound and, build up into whatever it is that you're asking for. And so for me, it's kind of been like that. So it's not that overnight my relationship changed or overnight my reactions and resistance disappeared. In fact, it took way longer than that, probably a lot of overnights. And yet at the same time, it started with me asking for something different, looking for something different. So once again, right here, what are you asking for already? That's different. That's greater. That's the whole field of infinite possibilities. Like, and when I even say infinite possibilities, I know it can be so construed in a way like mumbo jumbo and, metaphysical stuff. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm really talking about is truly what's available for you to choose in the world, no matter how far fetched it feels right now, no matter how much it feels like, yeah, maybe one day I'd like to have that, but I don't really, it's not congruent with, yes, I'm having it yet. It doesn't even matter any of that. But what are you already asking for that you haven't acknowledged? Because it's in those tiny wisps of asks and those subtle, moments where you're like, no, this is not how I'd like to show up. I do not like me when I show up like that. Even in that tiny acknowledgement, no matter how much you judge yourself after that, like, not relevant for this. What is relevant is that underneath it, you're still asking for something more. Something different is available. So for me, that has always been in terms of how I show up around people in my life that have been most difficult for me to show up around, because anytime there are people, there are projections involved, expectations involved, and you're aware. So you're aware and picking up on all of that all the time too. And so one of the things and one of the demands I've had in my life is to outcreate the reactions. Because honestly speaking, I didn't like the bitch that showed up when I was reacting. I can be really, really rude. I can be really, really unkind sometimes. And I don't like that. I never liked that underneath it all. And so when after so many years, finally it was time, like we were looking at, okay, so do I go back to to visit my family in India? But or should we, like, what how do we change this? How do we meet? And so it just the whole conversation came in a way that my parents, not only they chose to come here, they chose to come here for a really long period of time, like 5 months. And it was a mutual thing that we came up with, that cool, weirdly so, it's what seems to be what's required right now. And the moment I committed to that choice of inviting them over to my house for like 5 months and have like live with them around the four walls again, like, honestly speaking, my reference points of living with them under four walls were not very pleasant. No matter how much caring was involved, no matter how much I knew underneath, it was not pleasant. And so it was also interesting for me when we were chatting about having, them come over and stuff like that, how much it was just lighter to have them here be longer rather than like a short trip. And so with that, um, that in itself for me was like, okay, cool. This right here is a demand from the universe that it has to change, because I'm not having drama in my life anymore. I'm done being so reactive to everything. I want to have me. I'd like to have me in my life, and me, not the definition of me, not everything I've decided and concluded, all the limitations of me, none of that. I'm having what I know is possible, was the demand in my world. And I kept going, facilitating, change, being facilitated, asking questions and things like that. And it was so wonderful because even till when they had arrived, I was like, okay, I get that I have a different sense with it. I was still curious. I wonder how it's going to show up when they're actually here. Like, that's kind of like literally the test ground, right? They're like, you're in the field now playing, and how are you going to show up, girl? And it was so interesting for me that when I met them, the level of receiving I had around them had changed. Like, I was no longer being a doormat to my own reactions. And that to me was pretty mind blowing. Like, it's not something that, I cognitively worked on. It's a demand I made in my universe, and it showed up. And it was hell uncomfortable for me as well as for them. Because guess what daughter they're used to having? One who's always talking with walls up, and one with whom they have to always have their walls up against and really have this conflict in name of conversations. And so it was so new this time around when we met, because I knew I'm different and they could perceive it too. And so it took us like quite a few weeks to even like start like being in the same space and be okay with the new, more so for them than for me. And one of the great one of the greatest things I got to receive from that was also the awareness that I am tapping into their reality. So anytime I would start feeling uncomfortable, I would ask, is it mine? And be like, no, it's not mine. It's my awareness of what's going on for them. So when I started noticing how much I've changed, when my husband also pointed out how much, Ajat, he pointed out how much I had changed, I really started, I'm like, okay, what can I acknowledge here? Because here's the thing, guys, how quick are we at judging ourselves, right? What if we took half the energy and effort, at least, to also acknowledge ourselves, acknowledge the change, acknowledge the little ways in which things are moving, the little ways in which you're different, so I realized that I've got to really sit down and look at this and see what has changed, because this is huge. And what I found and what I think is at the premise of everything that created this transformation was allowance. Allowance is different than acceptance. Accepting is where, like, I accept they're like this, I'm like this, let's accept it and move on. Allowance. Allowance, on the other hand, is a space where everything is included and nothing has to change. Everything is just allowed to be. And so, what I noticed had changed in my universe and from my universe was a need to have them be any different than they are. For the very first time ever in my life, I recognized that I'm receiving my parents just as they are, without having a need to make them wrong for having a different point of view, without having a need for them to change, because I think that I know a better way. Like, so much so for being a superior asshole. And here's another thing to look at: how much in our reality, in our world, the way we grow up around us, have we misidentified what true caring is? So much of us, how much of everything that you grew up around was about, I care for you and I know this is better for you, so I'm going to torture you to choose it. I don't know about you, but I've been on the both sides of that. I've been on the receiving end of it. And to be honest, I've also been on the generous gifting end of it. And it's not truly gifting, but in a way that, that's what I was perpetrating on the world, that I know better for you. This is a better thing. Like, I found a better way of living life. So why don't you live it too? Why can't you see it? Why cannot you be an allowance of me? Because now I know that there is a thing called allowance. So now I demand it of you while being a total asshole and not having it for you or for myself. So that's been one of the biggest things that I found melted from my universe, a need for having my parents be anything different than they are. And that right there, it might sound tiny and it might actually not, but it's been so transformative. It's completely changed our interactions together. And the reason I finally got to, like, let's just record this conversation, let's just invite people and let them know that something different is, no matter how much fucked up you are, or no, sorry, I'm going to correct myself, no matter how much you think how fucked up you are. I think that wasn't even a correct English, but I hope you get my point. No matter how much you think you're fucked up, you're not. What else do you know is possible? And no matter how much you judge yourself for not already being it, what if, let's just bypass that judgment? What if you didn't have to change anything just for this conversation for a second? We're just gonna go over, it's okay, I get it, you judge yourself because you are not showing up the way you'd like. No problem. But let's just bypass that for a second and look at, what do you know is possible? What different? What are the things that you're judging yourself for? And what different reality underneath that are you aware of? Because the reason I came to, like, really recording this today, because they've been around for like about 5 or 6 weeks already. And yesterday was the first time we had a conversation, and a conversation that would have not even been possible until even like a year ago. And I don't say that lightly because, like I said, I've been a walking, talking reaction to them. So anything my mom and dad would say, I would immediately have something to defend, you know, defend for, defend against, be right, all of that. And in the last 1 year, some of the conscious choices I've made, some of the things I've consciously worked on, like literally fiercely been after to change in myself, is one, rightness, that how much I have a need to be right about my point of view. So that's been one of the things that I finally got after years and years and years of reading things and taking classes and, facilitating for that matter. Finally, I got that, how much I have a need to be right. And so that is something that I consciously worked on changing in my own universe. And the more I melt, and I say melt on purpose because I'm still melting that rightness, and so much of that has completely disappeared. How does it get even better than that? But the more I melt the need to be right, the more space it gives me to be present with what is. Because I don't have to defend anything. I don't have to expect anything. I don't have to expect anyone or anything to be different than it is. Because I don't have to be right about anything. And so, and that's so huge. Because what that does is, you know, think of it like every point of view that you have, that you're righteously holding on to, all the expectations that you have, all the things you think, and it's very insidious, you guys, because somewhere underneath all that, it comes from a really this space of knowing something else is possible, like space of possibility. So you know that a different way of being with each other is available, that people can be different, like a different reality should be available on planet Earth. You perceive it, you know it's possible. And then somewhere from that perception of those wisps of what's possible, we add these elements of shoulds and expectations and projections, which kind of that is basically our poison. And so when that started melting from my universe around my parents, when I recognized that I really literally have 0% need for them to be any different, they can have whatever point of view they want to have. And I'm not saying it from a place of, yeah, you can have whatever point of view you have. I don't agree with you, but I accept it. And that right there is the difference between acceptance and allowance. Because acceptance is, yeah, I get it. You have a different point of view, I accept it. Allowance is, yeah, I get it. We have different points of views. Cool. You're not wrong. I'm not wrong. It's just different. And so it was yesterday was a place like we had that space to, for the, I would say, first time in my life, have a conversation. Because until then, until yesterday, we have literally just been fighting. Even in the normal conversations underneath that, there's always this energy of fight. And yesterday, finally, my mom and dad were having something came up, and through some conversations, what eventually came out was ways, they got to, for the first time, truly express and be received for all of the ways in which they were confused around me. They didn't know what to do with me. Those kind of, like, the parent kind of conversations that they can have, like, I don't know what to do with you when you're doing this and that. And I don't know what to tell to the relatives and you don't want to talk to them. So we would have these kind of conversations all the time, but always from a space of fight. And so my mom and I'll give you just a little bit of an information, not going too much into the story, but my mom, basically we got to a space where she asked me, and I know my mom like approached it again from that space of caution, and from that space of, I don't know, she's gonna like have a reaction and we're gonna fight, like, already, because that's what the reference points have been for them, so I don't blame them. And so my mom was like, we don't know what, I don't know what to say when, people say that we want to talk to her, and I don't know how to respond. I don't know what your stance is in life. And, the kind of things she would always say that would trigger me. And yesterday, for the very first time, I was like, yeah, Yeah, tell me what you mean by that. What do you mean by that? And what exactly makes you feel that? Is that true? Like, literally, we were having conversations, you guys, me and my mom, were for the first time in my life having a conversation. How? How did that show up? I would, like I said, 100% credit it to the thing of not having a need for her to be any different than she is. And you know how that transpired too, even underneath that, has been the biggest transformation of my life is actually, yes, this letting go of reaction and truly being present and asking questions and actually engaging, rather than, so how many times in our lives are we truly and actually engaging with people versus actually looking for what am I going to say, what's the right, those kind of like being in our head, trying to figure out that figuring out energy in our head and spaces. And this has been one of the biggest tools, biggest, not tools, biggest gifts I've received from Access Consciousness. Gary Douglas, the founder of Access Consciousness, has always said for how thoughts, feelings, and emotion that's figuring out in your head space are a lower harmonic of your being, that a greater way of being is available on the planet. Like, learn from the plants, learn from the nature. Nothing in nature has thoughts or feelings or emotions. The nature is always perceiving and being and receiving. It always knows, it operates from a very different space. And whenever I've had these conversations, whenever I've heard it from Gary or from anywhere in the world, this is exactly the energy I've always resonated with, that, yeah, that should be possible. And so that's, you know, that's also one of the things that changed, that instead of going to my head within all the thoughts, feelings, and emotion realms, which, just perceive, even when I say that, the energy underneath it, how when we're in our thoughts, feelings, and emotion, and literally energetically in this space, like in our head space, somewhere like the V of our neck and above, like when that is the space we're operating from, notice the energy and how you show up with that versus when you're truly embodied, the V of your neck and below, present with what is, present with life, with people, without having a need for anything to be different than it is, without judging it to be wrong, and without judging it to be right. And truly having that space of allowance for everyone involved, including you. And so I tend to digress, but like a moment ago, this is what I was trying to get to, that what really changed for me was, yes, allowance for them. But what truly allowed me to create that space of allowance for them has been allowance for me. The more I practice cultivating trust in myself, the more I practice communion with myself, the more I practice the 5 elements of intimacy with myself, which, by the way, the 5 elements of intimacy are honor, trust, allowance, gratitude, and vulnerability. The more I started having that with me, and it hasn't been a linear journey, like nothing in personal growth and development is linear. I mean, no matter how much it sounds like, I know a lot of people tend to have this airy fairy woo woo kind of a thing around that, it's all peaceful and calm and wonderful. It's not always. Yet it's always can it I wouldn't say it is, it always can be ease no matter what's going on around you. So that's the promise of consciousness, that if the more you're choosing it, the more you're willing to receive it, you get to have and receive ease with everything that shows up in your life. All the conversations, all the people, all the circumstances and situations. So, yesterday, for the first time, my mother and I sat and had a conversation, guys. And this is so huge for me. And I know it's so huge for her too, because I don't think she has ever been received. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're so quick. Let me not say we. Let me not like just put it on you. Look at it if this is something that resonates with you too. But me, I have been so quick at like, and so I felt like so entitled so many times in my life that I should be treated in a particular way, I should be received. And yes, there's truth to that, but there was also this righteousness attached, which was my poison. But at the same time, if you look at it, how many people, like those people that aren't receiving you, have they ever been received? Do they receive themselves? Is that a conversation they're even willing to have? So like now I'm getting I'm getting how I'm getting like super meta with this. But basically, guys, I wanted to share this huge shift from my life, which actually doesn't feel like anything, and that's another part of the thing. Dr. Dane here always says that when you're being you, it feels like nothing, which is bizarre, isn't it? Like you would think that, oh, when I'm truly being me, I'll be all happy and giggly all the time. And yes, a lot of times. But when you're truly being you, it feels like nothing. It's space. Because you, the being, are space, your energy, your consciousness. So, what is truly possible? What different way of being and creating is available? And the reason I share this story, this epiphany, this huge transformation from my life with you today, and who knows what shows up tomorrow, I might react, but I do know I'm never, ever, 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 ever in my life going to be what I used to be. So it doesn't matter. There's no perfect way to do it. But that I can be this around my parents, that we can have this relationship more like a communionship together, that we can actually receive each other for the first time ever is so huge. And it has not always been like that. It's literally 2 months old. So, what the fuck else is possible, you guys? What do you know is available that if you trusted in you a lot more, would allow you to have the possibilities you're aware of with a lot more ease? Because one of the laws of the universe is ask and you shall receive. So if there's a different possibility you're aware of and you're asking for it, guess what? It is going to show up. Can you trust that? Can you start making yourself less wrong for all the ways you're not already what you think you should be yesterday? What else is truly possible? So, well, I'm going to leave you with that. And I'm going to just invite you to keep asking for more because it's available and you can for sure have it. Isn't that wonderful? All right, you guys. I'll see you soon in another exploration, some conversation, some riffs like that. Thank you so much for joining. And thank you so much for being here. I'm truly, 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 truly grateful. And if you'd like to work with me privately, I have a coaching program, which is actually literally called Cultivating Trust in You. Right now, it's on a one-on-one format. So let me know, hit me up, because there's so much more available. And haven't you always known it? So what else is possible? I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.